Welcome to the Emo Social Club podcast, broadcasting to you not live, but here at emosocialclub.tv. I am Brian.
And I'm Lizzie, and we're here this evening with a surprise special guest off the stream, Max Bemis of Say Anything. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight.
It's me. Yeah, thanks for having me. Seriously, I appreciate it. I appreciate that it means anything that I'm a surprise guest on anything.
It was a surprise to us. I mean, I think we
a good one though.
Yes, the last time we talked about you on the pod was when the band was going into a hiatus, a break. How would you refer to what this time has been?
A midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for the band, I mean, I don't see us. I wish I could say that, there'll be another 25 years of Say Anything. How old would I be? I would be 65. I'd be Paul McCartney age. So I think it's unlikely at that. So I think it's probably accurate that the band is also middle-aged.
Yeah.
So I would call it a midlife crisis for the band. And I hope that it does last until I'm Paul McCartney's age. I really do. I don't see any reason to ever, honestly, even then it was kind of a lame half breakup. I don't think that or I intended to not make the music again. It felt so not right that there was a part of me that felt it may never happen, but I fully intended actually the opposite. Like I was intending to do it eventually. Yeah.
Is that why the new song is called Psyche? Because I was like,
exactly.
That's
and
awesome.
Also, I'm mental. So there's that whole thing with the psych ward. So yeah, it's a little entendre-ist.
Yeah. Entendrist. It's
Entendriste.
Yeah. It's just like a very nice, like, I am a huge fan of Say Anything. So we'll get that off the bat here that we are.
Well, thank you.
Since we did that episode, we really wanted to, like, you were like one of our, like, North Star guests of like, we have to get like Max on at some point because this would just be like a very like nice, well-rounding of our podcast. So this is the last episode. Thank you for coming on.
No, it's not.
For future context there. I like that. That's awesome, though.
Yeah.
It's what the girlies call
manifesting. Not just a retrospective, because there was like a week of shows, so things have actually kind of happened. And music has been made. There's even been slight dramas behind the scenes, as it always is. And it's like, okay, here we go. So yeah, it's like we're back in it for sure. And it never really ended. It's like haunted my every movement in a good way. Like sure. Like in one of those friendly ghost movies where like Eddie Murphy's a ghost or something. And he's like, that's what it's like. Yeah.
It's just the Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy in it. But just Say Anything.
Exactly.
There we go.
That is, completely. Or like, he's who was he again? He was in Lion King, maybe. I feel like in two different movies he was like, oh yeah, Shrek. He's classically like follows Shrek around and is like kind of messing with him while trying to help him. I feel like that's also really accurate.
Damn.
Also sketchy sexually, and I think Eddie, has a sordid little bit of a. Yeah, so there's that.
It all comes together. I never knew we were going to be making Eddie Murphy analogies.
Yeah,
honestly,
come on.
Love it.
As many times as we've talked about Shrek on this podcast, just as a random like little aside, that is the most like
not so random. We feel like he's, but he's just. I mean, he's as ubiquitous as like Sesame Street was, when we were kids.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I mean, also
everywhere.
Weird. On the internet, everywhere. He's everywhere. And you think he's not in your life, but he's always there. Fucking Shrek. Sorry.
Shrek is always there for you, even when you need it at your darkest moments.
Even when you resent him. Yeah.
I'm having a moment just being like, man, I really resent Shrek for always being there.
Well, he's not even as good as the Puss in Boots movies. I mean, that's hard to be worse than your own spinoff. You know what I mean?
Honestly.
That's how bad Shrek is of a person. Is he a person? I think that's the moral of the movie, but
he's just like us for real. He's just
us. Hideous. Yeah.
Just like me for real.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about getting back together. You mentioned a couple shows too. So now that you're back in the thick of it, you're back in the thick of Say Anything.
Totally.
What is like? How's the reception going? How is the vibe been for being back?
I'm so fucking, when it comes to Say Anything, I'm so like skeptical because there would be moments where like we'd have a manager, and they're like, everyone loves the new single, man. They're big fans. And then I'd look on absolutepunk.com, and they're like, this is the end of this band. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, I literally hunt this guy down. But so it's like, and also and apparently even that was inaccurate. You know what I mean? Because there's so many people who would then come to a shows and know all the songs. So you really can't gauge, and you can only kind of read it through like the smaller interactions with kind of like your friends. And, like, for instance, I'm not engaged on social media whatsoever at all, really. I mean, I look at it, but I don't tend to engage on it. So like when I do look at it, I find out I'm like pretty backwards of a dad, but I'm not that backwards. Like I'll hear about, fads or memes or things like that, but I'm like, I intentionally, and I've kind of always been like this, wait for it to like be the last person to know about it. And then I'm like, okay, like I'm not bitter because it's too cool or not cool enough. I'm like, it's gone through the ringer of the hype machine, and now I can give it a proper assessment. So I feel like that's kind of how I am, where it's like, I'm just going to know, by when the album comes out, or, but I will say that, from what I can glean after, I didn't like jump on the boards that night, or jump on Instagram and like try to grasp as much glory as possible. Cause that's something I would do when I was like 19, and like, it works out at first, but then when you start going through like ups and downs in your career, like, wait, what the fuck? Like this was an effective, useful drug. And now it's not. It's toxic, and I'm overdosing. So I just avoid it by principle. And then like when I do, but the people around me have again told me that it's the reaction to the song is really, really positive. And I have seen people say, the things that I have seen people say about it are what I wanted them to take out of the song. You know what I mean? So that's the way I can definitely gauge that, at least for the people that matter, which is the only reason I'm doing the band, that it's hitting the right notes in terms of its intention, because so much of this band is intentional. And so much of it has been misunderstood, which is to some degree like why I do it, is to alienate certain people. If it's a punk band at all, it's because I'm saying things that are kind of hideous and fucked up. And if you don't have the kind of sense of humor to see the irony in it and the meta narrative, and almost even knowing some of the history of being the band, certain things can be taken completely out of context. So like if I see that people are getting it, catching on to some of the weird Easter eggs, or just kind of like, referring to a reference point or like an influence that comes out in the music. Yeah, that's great. Like that's the coolest thing ever, is when someone's like, yeah, it sounds like this band, or it sounds like this era that you were trying to convey this kind of theme. And then, and that has been completely accurate. And there's a lot of things that are different this time around as well. I've always had great managers, but now I'm basically being managed by like my friends that have kind of grown in the industry and are now like, managed Billie Eilish at one point. Like everyone who's in like a ska band is now like a fucking executive at Warner Brothers. Yeah. Like you've seen them. So now they're just my friends. Like the people who are actually managing me put out Is a Real Boy. So and Two Tongues. So it's just, it seems very obvious, and it's like I don't have to stretch myself so much into like just trying to avoid cliches or play into them and all that stuff. It's just very like, okay, I can kind of snooze and just write music and love that and love performing, and then like step back. And that was really the concept of why this era, the second potentially half of it, is going to be really different than the first one, because I very much so like lived for the band, identified solely as like the dude from that band, on like as a joke. And then it was too much. The joke became real, and it was like bad.
You committed too much to the bit, is what I'm hearing. Exactly.
And by the time I kind of wanted to pull out of the bit, like it was almost unfair, I think. I'm not going to judge myself too harshly because I'm like told not to by my therapist. But if I was going to be real, I would say it's like it was a little entitled of me to go, I did this bit, so I committed very much to this bit for the first half of this band's career. And then I kind of became happy personally, and then diverged from like this character that I had created, which was an actual fucking character, like for Is a Real Boy, there was a narrative. It was derived from me, but it was like, you know, like Larry David on Curb is a character. Like it's literally exaggerated to the point where he's like an actual bad person. And so like this was that. And then to the point where like, you know, I saw a lot of the people around me going down a wrong path. And so I went through sort of a confrontation of like my daddy issues and basically prescribing that future to myself. But a lot of it came from like PTSD from my childhood and before the band, but then also the PTSD of putting even though I would never take it back, but when you do take leaps like writing Wow, I Can Get Sexual Too, and you're talking about like deviant sexual behavior, you know, you're basically daring some people who may not have all the whatever capacity for that kind of irony to be like, damn, this guy sounds like he hates women. You know what I mean? Like I invited that, you know, and that was the risk I took, and I kind of had to pay the piper. And you know, but it was really freeing to go, hey, I also, you know, and the people who care about me in the industry, and like I imagine people like you guys, like, you know, we're very happy to see me just like trying to better myself, and everyone. As soon as I met my wife and started having kids, like there was like a little throng of people going like, oh, we wanted to be miserable, but like it was brief. And then everyone really embraced my family and Sherry and all this stuff. So I think it at least came across as genuine, and it wasn't some kind of like ego driven bullshit. It was just, it was a midlife crisis. I was like, I'm a writer now, none of this, but it was like, it's so special. It was really, to me, it was like, I already knew. That's why I didn't really break up the band. And I said it in the letter, like, we're going to come back. I'm going to be bitter. And it's like going to be a weird thing. And I guess I'm just not bitter is the only difference between what I projected, because it's really fun. And I just feel like I needed it. I really needed the band. I'm not doing it for money or any of those reasons, but the character would, you know, so I can still play for that joke of that I'm coming back just because it's like emo Resurgence and when we were young, but I just needed angsty emo music in my life again, because I've been through hell over the past few years. So yeah.
I was going to say it's obviously like a lot of bands are reuniting at this time because of that resurgence and the when we were young.
Exactly.
And like, I mean, I'm assuming that because there is such an interest in it and they want to fill out that lineup with the maximum amount of bands, they're like, who else can we reach out to? Who is not currently booking a tour right now? We need you to come back. It's good to hear that you're doing it for you.
And like Oliver Appropriate, the last record, which was like kind of the epilogue of that character from Is a Real Boy, like this was when like before when we were young, so it was actually pre-COVID. It was around like Me Too era, I think, if you can think about that kind of like PC becoming very hardcore, like and Twitter becoming really combative, like pre-Trump or like early Trump era, where everyone was like dividing, and like it was a really contentious time. And one of the things that I noticed, you know, which was not really related to that, was all the bands starting to get back together on the low. So it wasn't like when we were young level where it's like Coachella level, where it's like everyone could fucking get back together now because they're making a lot of money. But like at the time, which was, you know, 2000, whatever, 17 or something, like, or 16, it was like Braid got back together, and like a lot of these kind of like emo bands were getting back together. So in my kind of story for this character, I'm like, you know, he's getting back to, he's doing an anniversary tour for his band that kind of broke up, and he's really disgruntled about it. And there's songs on there about getting a band back together on our last album, which I didn't know would be our last album. It wasn't planned to be. And now I'm doing it. And it's really funny because I mean, the band is really just making fun of myself. And I still am a cliche, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think just because I can point it out doesn't mean that I think I'm above any of that stuff. And I think that's kind of always been maybe the humanist message of the band, with like admit it and stuff like that.
I think it's really interesting that compared to so many other acts that we like listen to and just like have their album discography of, where they're doing these types of concept albums that like tell the story of somebody else, but then they're acting as it. It seems like you are your own actor within your own storyline, even if it is different. But and you kind of kept it going.
We all are, you know, and I think that comes from the fact that like I wanted to write before I wanted to be in a band, and I was just kind of a movie geek and a comic geek, and when I say geek, like that gives it too much. I admire geeks. I admire people who like toughed it out in like freaking Texas, like and had to fight jocks and stuff. Like I was in LA where like those were the cool kids, you know, but I was still technically a geek. Like I devoted my life to like movies and just dreaming and reading books and thinking about stuff like that. And then, you know, it was really age appropriate to get into punk music. And so I went with it and I loved it. And it was just perfect for me. It was more visceral than like, one day I may write a novel or direct a movie or make a comic, you know? So it was like, fuck yeah, I can do this right now. And I love music just as much as I love this other stuff. But initially I was always just thinking about things in that sort of, you know, a dude who's taken mushrooms and thinks he's deep way. You know, so I also think it's funny, you know, like, you know, what you said is awesome. And like, I appreciate it, but I also think it's like pretty hokey. And I see that, you know, the only thing that really separates me from like someone who would be like, yeah, I did like, I'm so sorry to say this because he's nice, but like Jared Leto, you know what I mean? Like where he's like, I became the Joker. I was mailing them like boiled potatoes with blood in the middle and they would have to, you know, like, and he's that same way in his band, you know, like he gets up there and I'm like, fuck, dude, that's like Michael Jackson level, you know, like he's so confident, but he's not like humping girls' faces. He's like in some kind of weird sci-fi thing that he's narrating in his head. And I admire it. And it's like, but I'm no better because like if you were like a Harvard professor or something, you would look at like my exercises in like intellectualism and like meta and you'd be like, this is ridiculous. Like this guy's just in an emo. And I've seen that, like that energy started out for me when I went to like Sarah Lawrence College and I was like the bro, you know what I mean? Like as much as like I'm self-aware and all these things, I'm an actor in this thing. It's like, they're like, yeah, whatever, dude. Like you just like smoke weed and like, you know, like it was just like, I was a dork there in a way because I was too norm. So I've kind of fallen into that almost more than I've fallen into, I play into a character I think that's dumber. And a lot of people play into a character that's like cooler or more like worldly and you know what I mean? Like they're the leader of some revolution. And I'm like, no, like if because my self-image tends to be negative. Like I've risen above that over time, but like I'm an insecure fucking person as fuck. And the only way I can be secure is owning that.
Yeah, I found like with let's go with another like concept thing of like My Chem, Black Parade, Three Cheers Too. It's like I think it tends to be like I want to tell a story that is autobiographical. I'm using quotes for the listener, but it's not quite about like it's not like Gerard is saying this is what is happening to me. He's giving like a little bit of like I can separate myself from the art in that way. And like the way you're describing it is exactly what I liked about Say Anything is like there is no separation here, even though there is, it's still very much like
it's just, that's really cool. And that I've never really thought about it that way, but it's true because that is the distinction. I think what it is more like, you know, if Gerard is like, you know, Spielberg in that scenario, and he's telling these really cool, big stories that, you know, spin out of his psyche, I tend to like, as much as possible, make it a blatant thing. Like, I mean, God forgive him if he was guilty, but like I grew up a lot with like Woody Allen and people like that. And even if you look at like Kevin Smith, like all his movies are just like his friends chilling in a fucking mall. It's blatantly, you'll have the main guy. And even if he's like a super handsome dude, like whatever, he's still just Kevin Smith. Like they just talk like him. And he makes fun of the movie Clerks in the Jay and Silent Bob. Like that's definitely the thing, you know, but at the same time, like, you know, Silent Bob isn't exactly like him. And even Jay, you know, for that poor actor dude who like went through all that shit, like I'm sure there are times he's a great example where he's like, I play into this thing of being like a complete idiot. And I do talk like that, but it's me at my worst. And so therefore it's more amusing. And like my art is making fun of myself. So why would I sit there and be like, God, I feel good today. I'm sober. Yes. And like, there's some moments like that and Say Anything that are really sincere, but like you said, where I'm using like an interpretation of my own events, embellishing it, and also interpreting it in probably the worst way possible. You know what I mean? So like Molly Conley, like that wasn't a real person. It was just a collection of my insecurities about being in a band, you know, that it was selfish and misogynistic. And I just wanted to be as honest as possible. And I admit that to even bring levity to that is almost problematic, but I think I can't help but be that kind of problematic. You know, like I always will you know, in a way, apologize and be like, I hope the next generation has a better go. And they seem to, you know what I mean? Like Hotelier or like Modern Baseball or Front Bottoms, like there's a little bit less of that toxicity. But I think, unfortunately, I grew up with a lot of fucking toxicity in my family, in my teenage years, and then especially at the early years of the band. So I think it's something I have to address. And now, especially coming back, it just is what we represent to people, was rising above that, I think, and making fun of it and feeling like being able to laugh at it and feel like there's some real emotion in this scene that was becoming really contrived. And like, you know, the people who initially liked Is a Real Boy were like into Brand New and into Taking Back and all that stuff, which I love, but we're able to go, okay, but I'm starting to feel a little bit weird here because there's dudes and they're just like, you know, and it's like, I'm feeling a little bit like everyone's getting stuck up and it's not what it once was. And that in and of itself became almost like a prideful thing where it's like, I'm above this. So it's just it's a post like scene thing. So I can't not address that. You know, I wrote the last album was about like a literal, you know, a closeted homophobic serial murderer, you know, like the guy from American Psycho. And it's like, but then who would stop Bret Easton Ellis from writing American Psycho? Just because it's a comment on a part of him that feels closeted. He's like open gaming. So I just think it's like, I hope that maybe like with like stuff like podcasts and social media, blah, 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 but like in the sense that it does get more integrated where people in bands or young people, you do see that though, because I'm so sorry, I'm rambling so bad.
I love this media analysis.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah, please.
Well, I just think you see like the people that my kids like, you know what I mean? Like Oliver Tree is my like younger kid's favorite. Like they know all his songs and everything, but he's doing what I did essentially. He's more than just a dude in a band. He's making fun of himself. He's like, but he's really earnestly enjoying it. He enjoys fashion, but it's like ridiculous fashion. And he also is like a comedian, you know? So I think that's almost like where to this day, I'm still striving to do more of that. You know, I wrote comics. I continue to do that. And, you know, I think my mistake in going, I'm a writer was going like, I can be both. And I don't have to like resent this part of myself because I love it. And the only reason I resented it was because I was psychologically fucked up and letting it like run my life.
I think it definitely serves as kind of like relating it back to like movies and films and the context of it all is where if we have so much access to things, we have to also acknowledge that once we get to a certain point in time, like 2023, the way that we interact with so many other people and think is wildly different from 2003.
What's it going to be? It's too much.
It's like so different, but you know, you can look back and absolutely like look at things like, you know, for example, if you look at like American Pie, you're like, oh my God, everything that's terrible. But then if you look at it now, but then you can use that as a teaching moment and say like, wow, this is what it was like back then. There's a lot of things that have improved, but these are the things that are still here. So how do we live within the society where it still is? How do we work to fight against it and to better it? And like, that's kind of what it is.
I think it's like futurism. It's what you're saying. You know, it's like if the people who made American Pie were aware, like, I think, first of all, I loved it at the time. I was like 13. I was the core audience, right? But I will say, you know, something like, you know, like Spike Jonze movies or, you know what I mean? Like those movies were like goofy and shit, but then they'd be like trying to predict in a way within the art where this was going to go. Whereas something like American Pie to me is the equivalent of like the Strokes. As much as I loved them at the time, their first few albums were just like as present as they could be and the coolest thing it could have been at the time. I think they grew out of that, you know, and they're just like a classic rock band. But at the beginning, I had a hard time with like indie culture there because to me it was like American Pie. Like they weren't seeing the misogyny. Even me at the time seeing American Pie, I couldn't relate to just wanting to lose your virginity. You know, I was still a virgin when I saw it, and I didn't care about losing my virginity that much. I just wanted like a love and a girlfriend. And yes, I wanted to do that, but I wasn't like one of those guys, you know? So I feel like just the awareness of as universal as you can get and as empathetic as you can be, that's all you can do. Because I'll never be as woke as like my kids, you know what I mean? And that's good though. Like, why should that be? If they got less woke, we'd have like idiocracy, and that'd be terrible. They're way smarter than me, you know? Like they're way more open-minded. I want to be antiquated. I just want, like, I'm not going to try to not be, you know what I mean? I just am. So, but I'm also like only 40, and, you know, there is kind of like Gervais, again, another problematic person. But he did The Office. Like he was literally like in a terrible failed band, worked in an office, and he did The Office at 40. So it's, you know, there's other people like that too. So those are the people I look up to, in the sense that there are, you know, I do love writing. I do want to still do that stuff, but I think I couldn't do it without saying anything. Also, just being in a comfortable like part that isn't causing me some kind of weird middle-aged reaction to it, you know, because it was very weird.
It's really interesting. Because like I think when we even talk about like the emo scene coming back, and like the fact that it was the early 2000s, misogyny and all that, and like separate, I know there's a lot of conversation about separating art from the artist and all this stuff, and I'm not going to tell anybody which way to land on that, but certainly like there is a sense that like if it is a time capsule and it is like the time that it happened, shouldn't it still exist as that time capsule so that we can know what it is about it? But then kind of just like say, you know, I'm not going to watch American Pie and then go do American Pie. Or like,
that's great. I think that's a really cool point. Like, you know, there should be a movie that's making fun of those movies, not in a sort of like scary movie way, but like you know, a early 2000s retrospect. I mean, to me, like, we're talking about doing certain things for Is a Real Boy's 20th anniversary, which is crazy, but that's next year. And, you know, at this point, you know, for instance, the first thing that came to mind when you were saying that was like hair metal. So like, or like 80s, whatever, like Boy George and stuff, but more so hair metal, because like it had this resurgence even amongst like indie snobs when I was like in high school, where you'd wear like a Queensryche shirt, and it was like cool. It's like metal, bro, and it was ironic. So I think emo's kind of like that to a lot of people, but then there were bands that came out of that sort of resurgence that were like, you know, Cave In, or more so, what's that band? I mean, it's literally an amazing band that I have such ADD that my mind is like, you're not going to think of it now that you're scared.
Yeah.
Mastodon.
Yeah.
Mastodon. So like that entire scene of like post-metal, I think kind of only became successful because there was like people looking at that shitty era of metal and going, well, that could have been cooler. Like, you know, like there was so much wrong with that shit, Spinal Tap wise, that like, what if you took the best parts of that and ran with it? So to me, that's what like Oliver Tree and Melanie Martinez are kind of doing. Like they're taking the emo and they're going into like the richness that comes with like hip hop and pop. And like you guys said, it's eventually going to not mean anything. You know what I mean? Because you could be in a bar and hear like a Def Leppard song, and you're not really thinking about that the song's like probably about like a 13-year-old groupie. You know what I mean? Bowie.
Yep.
I mean, and some people get away with that shit for real. And like, thank God I never did that stuff. Like, because, but I was a terrible person in certain other ways. You know what I mean? Like, I certainly like, just by being like a bad friend or ghosting someone who cared about me, who knows? Or when I was like manic and didn't know what I was doing or even saying. Like, I hurt a lot of people. But I will say, like, again, I do think there's something to be said about separating the art only in certain contexts. Like if you do have like a really cool song, and obviously there's like the extreme of like Lost Prophets.
Yeah, no, that's like absolutely not.
100%.
They're not reuniting, you know, they're not taking a special errand on the, you know, like, all right, buddy. You know, it's a big show. Come on out. We'll put the cuffs on. Yeah. Con Air style. You're going to Vegas.
Yeah.
No, that's not happening. Or I'll take him out. But I will say that like certain things that were like I could hear a song, and like I have a big issue with the band Brand New, but I could hear like some like Sick Transit Gloria or something in like a Hot Topic because I'm going to like get my little dude's ears pierced or something, and I'd be like, it's pretty sick, huh? And it would be funny and at the same time gross, you know, like, so I feel like my job is to acknowledge that, you know what I mean? Like when I played Wild Kid Get Sexual at these shows, and I actually said I would never play it again, or at least for a while during that Me Too-ish era. So it had been a long time. It didn't feel it didn't feel gross, and I actually used to feel gross. Like even right when it came out, I felt kind of gross. Like I got married shortly after that, so I'd be singing about this like really sordid moment in my life that was completely misinterpreted by so many people as to be an actual pedophilic act. You know what I mean? Because I'm saying the girl's young, but she was like a year younger than me.
Yeah.
You know, I think she's like, now I just feel like she's my age, if not more mature, because I still know her. She's really nice. She's a good person. Like, and also we were friends. Like it was in no way like a misogynist act because she was really cool. I just felt bad that like if feelings were going to be involved, you know, was I less involved than her? And so therefore, like I was afraid of being misogynist. And I think that's really, and maybe I was unintentionally at certain points because I can't speak to that. I'm a dude. So like I really, that might have been more misogynistic unintentionally than I meant it to be, but I would never willingly, and I was so afraid of being bad to people in general, I'm so codependent, that speaking about it in the way I did on that song was certainly not glorifying it. If anything, it was a joke about how shitty we all are when we're following that like instinct, and women too. And that's why like, or everywhere, you know, all over the gender is immaterial when it comes to that, because I don't think every like lady or someone who's not a dude singing that song is just going, yeah, I was once that girl. I think that they're going, yeah, I felt like that too. Like I've laughed myself to sleep over like Frenching some guy at a show and then being like, fuck him, and running away with my friends. Like, I think it's just universal, but I use this character, you know, like I think American Pie is a really good example. It's like a Stifler-esque character. I think I actually talk about Stifler that's weird, on the new record. I mentioned his name. Yeah, and I'm using him to describe toxic guys. The line is like I hate my influence on Stiflers. So that's weird that you brought that
energy.
up.
Look at us, exactly. Connected.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
I think like so I'm in a cover band, so I'm so sorry that I said that.
Oh, are you kidding? I started out covering.
It's an emo cover band, so we play Well I Can Get Sexual Too.
It would say anything, as you can imagine. You play it?
I play it. It's one of my favorites to play because it's just a fun song, and the audience like
it changes it up during a set.
Exactly,
it's for us. Take a breather.
Yeah, the audience just seems to like to go, oh, I know this song, and I'm going to sing along to it. And like you're saying, obviously, their connection to it is going to be different depending on where they came from. Like being around the same age, like you know. You can't take away that we might have had an experience that is talked about in any song. Like the experience happened, the experience exists, whether it's good or bad down the line is kind of immaterial because it's like the experience.
You can't know. You can't know.
But I think it's like there's just a lot of people who are it's interesting to me because it is so autobiographical for you, and then how many people hear a song like that and insert themselves into the character that you're writing about and creating, and then determine the song and the content of the song based on their interpretation of the character as it appeals to themselves. I'm like, how are you doing this?
That's the idea, though. That's good because no one can. I'm too weird for anyone to really know the real me unless we're like sitting here having this conversation. Like I really do think that that's what it's for. It's just that, you know, people who are like me, I guess, when they do art, whether it's like me or someone who's like a pretentious avant-garde artist who like himself sits in the gallery and he's like, come touch me, and he's naked and he's like, you know, like it's that kind of a postmodern thing where it's like, it's not, I wasn't the one to come up with that. You know what I mean? Like there were plenty of people who did that sort of self-aware shtick. And it was really my attempt to, as much as I could, let people know what the deal was. And there was obviously, it was going to inflame some people, but the people who got it it would be easier for them to do that, to project into it. And it would still be abstract because like there were people who related to that song who were straight up like the worst people of all time. I know them. They were in bands and they sucked and they loved my music. But I will say, like, you know, there were more people who were, I think, compassionate, who were able to like find the way into that and occupy it, because other songs that were like meant for, like, for me, like I always loved, like, you know, Me Without You and Page of Lion and stuff like that, you know? But there was less, especially at that time, those guys would not admit to being like fucked up, you know? So in the sort of like intellectual end of emo, or like, you know, at the drive-in weren't going like, and then we did heroin and we got tempted to sign to a major label. We all got on coke, pretended we hate each other, and we thought we were going to be the next Beatles and the next Nirvana, but we didn't. So we started 2 new bands. Like, you know, I want people to be able to listen to it and be like, okay, so this guy isn't thinking he's above me. So whatever I did that makes me feel like that, certainly he's no better than me. You know what I mean? Like, he's not some hallowed, sanctified hero. He's just a lot like me and happens to devote his life to like perfecting being honest about it in a funny, I guess, in a, you know, catchy or inspiring, at time, emotional way. You know, like that's, I never want, and I do see that it's almost sometimes hard with my fan base, because the only times I have a hard time is because they expect me sometimes to be okay in a way that I'm not. Not because like they think I'm better than them, but because we all feel like shit. And I think they've seen me go through so much shit that they're like, dude, like this guy probably woke up this morning and maybe sharded, and his kids ran out the door. And so they see me and I'm sweating and I'm anxious, and they're like, beam dog. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally like your friend who you know is fucked up. And so you're like, how are you doing? And he's like, you know, and it's so like, that's the interaction with me and the fan base. And that's what I want it to be. But there are times I'm desperately unhappy. Like, my mental illness is seriously bad. And so like, there's some stuff on this album, I guess, that would be more real than anything I've ever done, because what I went through over the past few years was so traumatic that it's something I would almost make up on like Hebrews to express my fears for being a father and like loving Sherry. And it actually happened. There was shit where people tried to take my kids. There was shit where, you know, the COVID, like the social, whatever, like climate of COVID really was toxic for the place that I lived. And I love a lot of the people who I was going through stuff with. It's not like I suddenly like hate a bunch of people. It's like Taking Back Sunday and now we're on war terms. Like, there was like serious shit that went down. That I mean, that when I explained the situation that inspired this album to people, they're like, "Oh my god!" And we'll laugh because it's so crazy. And it starts with like Kanye and goes all the way to the kid shit, and it's a very intense thing. So for me to write about that, it was almost in character because it was so crazy that that I couldn't believe it was really happening compared to some of the other stuff.
It's like that entire time I feel was definitely such like an out of body, out of mind type of moment.
Yeah,
so I think
surreal.
that you're able to put this into like an album to talk about
Yes.
all of
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And now I'm wondering, on this album, obviously we have references to Stifler, we have references to Kanye or Ye.
Yeah.
What other
Yes.
references are you drawing from to use as kind of like an artifact for your life?
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm going to be honest. It's all that, like, to the point of being the joke and also very serious. Like, the cool thing of what you said about how like you and your friend got along because he liked saying anything, like, this is written for you guys. It really is. And I think it's universal in the sense that like, yeah, like the songs are kind of like, you know, like, I guess like Alive and Hate Everyone. They're more like accessible and like just big anthemic fun emo songs, like kind of what we're known for, I guess, rather than like weird lo-fi eclectic shit. But lyrically, they're built for people. Like, there's layers and layers of Easter eggs to the point where like, it's a great question because every song, even like Psyche, the one song that we released, you know, if you go through it, and I feel really contrived even saying this because it's like, who's going to take the fucking time? But if you're bored and you're on the toilet and you're looking at the lyrics, you know, even like the first thing to come to mind is like the last verse talks about, you know, blink and you'll miss like the moral. And that's just like referencing Blink-182 and how, you know, people kind of missed out on the profundity of like what they were doing. And then like the comments spread, the days are done. That's like, you know, the band broke up and now we're getting. So if you know the history of the band, I mean, to the point where at the very end of the song, I get so awkwardly honest about what I went through that it's like, people probably are like, that was really cool, but like, what the fuck is up with the ending? And that's what I intended. Like, I wanted it to be uncomfortable, but also the most like comfortable experience. Like there's songs referencing like my friends like Forrest from, you know, Hello Goodbye, and like using him in some dumb pun with the word forest. You know, it's very, it's so self-aware that it goes back around from being like a joke to being like, you would put it on. And by the way, if you may hate it, by the way, so I'm not assuming, but if you're with that friend who you bond over your experiences loving Say Anything, or even that kind of music, it's built for that. It's built for putting on really loud in the car, and you're kind of embarrassed when someone looks over and you're like rocking out to like blink. You know, it's like, it's just like making fun of, but embracing that experience, I guess. So it's all a reference and I really appreciate that question, because it's like right on. It's right on with what the album is so far. Yeah.
And I was thinking about this today, like getting prepared for this. It feels like you are kind of like the center point of all emo stuff.
Like Kevin Bacon. Like, I'm not the biggest.
Yeah, like,
you know,
the 7 degrees of
100%.
Kevin Bacon. I love using that theory like almost every day, and when I teach it and my journalism courses.
And not anything beyond emo though. Like, you know what I mean? Like you couldn't connect, you know, Joe Biden to me. I'm like a random Jew from LA. But in terms of just this small, often ridiculed subgenre, I really am there's guys I know who are like in bigger part, almost like maybe way better, you know, at music, that like Jeremy Enoch from Sunny Day, right? So that dude has spent most of his career like a weird hermit traveling the country with a backpack, like just praying and like being deep. Whereas I kind of got shafted into the entire like generic emo band experience. You know, we were on Doghouse, we got upstream to a major label, we played Warped Tour, we played Bamboozle, and it was like right when it reached its peak, it was like my Chem got big, and we were supposed to be kind of the next one of those bands, and we didn't become commercial. We instead kind of created a weird cult fan base, and then started taking out bands like Front Bottoms and Modern Baseball, and we almost became more aligned with that than the bands that got big commercially. Like we didn't blow up in that way. So to me, it's like I skirted both worlds of when it became cool and when it became really uncool. You know, like we did Warped Tour probably the last time it was big, and then it started going, you know, and we're like, oh shit. And it was really funny to us because we're like, I imagine you guys were, where you can start to find things funny about the scene. And we're like young. People didn't realize how young we were. Like people thought we were the same age as My Chem and Get Up Kids, but we're like a good 5 to 10 years younger than some of those people. So we were like the annoying little brothers who could name like the first Yellow Card EP and also why it's funny. You know what I mean? Like, and love it, but love it at the same time. Like we're not like snobby Vice magazine people. Like we love that shit. But we're also young enough to be able to go, okay, this is like problematic, or it's goofy and contrived. And, you know, I think that's another thing that caused some resentment for me, because I cared too much what like Pitchfork thought, you know what I mean? As opposed to realizing that they were becoming a joke too, you know, even beyond me. Like I thought I was the only one who's like, fuck this shit. But everyone was starting to think of it. And that's why there is an emo resurgence, and it's kind of respected. And we became a Pitchfork band, weirdly. They write about us. And I appreciate it. Like, I don't hate Pitchfork anymore, because it's like hating, I don't know, like any actor who who's the dude from SNL who like dates a bunch of celebrities. And yeah, I actually reference him too. I feel like I have more in common with him than Kanye. You know, it's just like, I think you can go through that, and it's just about, do you weather it, and can you make fun of yourself? Will he make fun of himself in 10 years that he was like out, you know, doing that stuff with a matching outfit to Machine Gun Kelly? You know what I mean? Matching whatever overall. I think, but that doesn't make him not intelligent. It's just about if you can look back and evolve and, you know, and be self-aware enough to not be like, oh, because a lot of those bands became so pretentious, and they were like, thought they were better than their fans. They wanted to be Radiohead. As soon as they got big, they're like, well, now we want to be opening for the Shins. Like that's an actual story of someone I know, one of these bands, and they're a really good band, good person, but they actually fired their agent because, you know, they were touring with us and like Hot Rod Circuit, and they're like, why didn't we get the Shins tour, bro? And the agent's like, I don't know what to say, you know, because you're like Long Island.
Yeah, like
emo.
the Shins are not the vibe right now. but maybe later.
Yeah, exactly. But they didn't care. You know what I mean? They're like, we should be. They don't see that we're influenced by them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's a weird mentality, a resentment. But again, I think we were young enough to grow up with like Blank and bands like that didn't take themselves that seriously. And we couldn't. You can't fake like that you were always cool when you grew up listening to the Ataris more than any other band. And I think to this day, I will put on like the second Ataris record, and it's better than a lot of indie rock records that I like occasionally listen to. A few Animal Collective records are by far worse than like what's it called? Blue Skies, Broken Hearts.
That's a correct statement for most other albums besides those two Glass Animals. I've had that conversation many a times actually.
I do it all the time too. When I first got in, when Riot by Paramore came out, I would piss off everyone on purpose by comparing it to like Radiohead albums that were not as good. You know what I mean? Like the one after Kid A, what's it called? But it was like the second one that was exactly like Kid A, but just kind of weak. You know what I mean? Like you still look back and if you were reviewing it in Rolling Stone, you'd be like, it's a brilliant compliment. Yes, it's a little derivative, but it's them. It's Radiohead. You know, for me, I'm like, no, this fucking album's way better. Listen to this shit. She's like Bono. You know, so I like. That was my thing was, you know, that's why we did In Defense of a Genre, was to annoy people who expected us to be too cool for it just because we were making fun of it. Because I still earnestly love it.
Yeah, that's where I was going to say, like, you've got the most email credit by doing In Defense of the Genre, getting everyone together. Doing a double CD at that time was also ballsy as fuck. So that was pretty.
It was just pretentious as fuck, you know, like I couldn't. I appreciate you thinking about it that way, and I just don't. I have imposter syndrome, so I can't see the baldiness. I just felt impetuous because so many people were like, "You just had a pretty big album. Like you could literally be a huge band if you just played ball a little bit." But I'm like, I can't. Yeah. I really there are things I need to do artistically. I am not willing to in any way sacrifice one song on this record, and because. You know, I was kind of one of those like Billy Corgan-y, like weird, it's the guy in the band, you let him do what he wants types. They couldn't get away with like putting me in the studio with Chad Kroeger and having him write the songs, which was suggested.
That's awesome though.
Say anything a butt rock era?
Like, not so much. Don't bring it.
Would you do that now? Could we get you in the studio with Chad Kroeger now?
That's such a good question, and I almost said yes, but unfortunately it's no. Okay. And that's probably just because I have kids and I don't have the time for something like that. He seems kind of funny and smart, and I actually do think – I remember when their first song, This Is How You Remind Me. Like before you kind of knew what they really would be, I was like, this is another pretty good like Stained type band that like wrote a really fucking good – almost like 80s metal power ballad. This is not bad. And then they got kind of sucked into the weird like Sugar Ray, like celebrity rock thing. And I started to obviously feel weird about it, but I would do it on a lark if I didn't have kids that I have to take care of. I would just be like, I bet we're going to get along. I bet me and this dude are going to understand each other on a deep level.
We just like it. I think that like as we've gotten more like obviously with the resurgence and everything, with TikTok, with everybody kind of getting involved in all this stuff, the memes have just gotten a lot better about it, and like the acceptance of this stuff.
That's the closest you can get. You know what I mean?
Memes. So like the idea of like we were so harsh on Nickelback, we were so harsh on like I mean even like to continue the topic of In Defense of the Genre, at the time it's like this is kind of weird, like they could have just done this. But now we look back at that and we go, oh, let's like revisit that. And it's like, you know what? Actually, like we were weird about it at the time, but why were we so weird? It kind of rules. It's kind of cool.
It's just context. Yeah. It's totally context, you know, like those records that like the Get Up Kids, Saves the Day, and The Promise Ring did all at the same time that were like Beatles influenced and completely failed. And they all literally hated life. Or like it literally spun them out into dark paths. Every one of those people. But then you listen to it 5 years later and it just sounds like Band of Horses or something. Like they were actually ahead of the curve. And then there's other things that are just kind of like, if you listen to like Copeland, it's like, oh, this is just like a cool pop song. Like, it's like, you know, it's not, you don't think like, oh man, it's so poppy. Remember when poppy was a big thing? I don't know about, man, this new one's so poppy. It's like, we don't give a fucking shit now. We're like 40 years old. If you hear a good Miley Cyrus song, you're like, damn, all right, Miley, like that's some poppy shit. That's good. You want it to be poppy. So I agree with you entirely. It's like the double album thing. Who cares?
Yeah.
At this point, it's like just on Spotify. Like people are just going to like seek out the songs they like. It's not like we're like, guess what, motherfuckers? Another double record, which I think we're toward. But it's not gonna, you know what I mean? It certainly isn't gonna do what it did. If anything, the only thing I could anticipate, and I hope this is true, is, you know, for people who've been waiting to hear us for a long time, if the more songs we do and the more things we do, more chances we take, it's just kind of interesting and fun. Drake, I mean, come on, like he does everything all the time to the point where it's like, when are you doing all of this? And people don't have enough time to be like, man, that new, you know, 21 Savage record's too much of a departure, because the next song he's like doing another like hardcore, you know, like it's just very like, that's how art, in my opinion, should be, where it's like there shouldn't be so much weird pretentiousness and restrictions on taking risks and stuff like that.
Now, with that in mind, obviously, we kind of want this genreless kind of society in a way, because we kind of get a lot of really cool stuff out of it. What are some artists that you are really grasping onto now? Whether they're new or they've been around for a while, but ones that are like, you're just like, yes, like this is fucking rad.
I'll be dead honest. So like it's first of all the stuff that I like, I still pretty much like. There's very little of it that's like aged badly to me. Like I can still listen to like the Rocket Summer. You know, I still feel like they're awesome. You know what I mean? Like I also feel like the truth is, if I was going to be dead honest about like what touches me the most, it's like hip hop music now. And it's been that way for a really long time, because I started out, like my first tape was like Whoop, There It Is. And I would like learn all the words to Tupac songs. And that's probably why I guess my lyrics are more lyrical or whatever. Cause it took work, you know, to sit there and be one of these, as you know, if you did that, it's like you'd all sit there with your friends, and it's kind of like a weird like almost like a passive aggressive contest, like who knows every word to the Biggie song. And it's like, you just feel cool when you know all of them. And so that was in there. And then I just dove so hard into punk and indie rock that it was like my job in a way to be immersed in it. And when I finally was like, I'm going to be a writer, I basically turned to music that I felt like I could relate to, maybe not on a literal level sometimes, but like in terms of like the mentality, and what it was aspiring towards, and also stylistically, like I love wordplay, and I do find it to be becoming more and more genreless. You know what I mean? Like if you put on like a Kendrick Lamar record now or something, or Tyler the Creator, like those, to me, that's like the new Princes and you know, Bob Dylan's are those guys. And so, but that, I don't want to dismiss, you know, my peeps, you know, like boring white people who play indie rock, because it's like there could be just as many of those bands, and there have been. You know, like I really loved The Hotelier. I loved all those bands that came out around that time and were almost taking what my band and other bands like that did and just made it better and more like less problematic and more I don't know, intellectually stimulating. So I love those bands. And I like what my kids listen to. I like the pop they listen to. You know, we went to go see Melanie Martinez, and it was like I cried. I legitimately cried. And so I like anything really to some degree, as long as it's very much the same shit I always liked. But like you said, it doesn't, it's a genreless thing in terms of what I appreciate. You know what I mean?
Does this mean that there will be another Say Anything cover for a Punk Goes Crunk in the future?
I don't want to spoil it, but there will be something a lot, maybe better than that.
Ooh.
All right.
Yeah. But if Punk Goes Crunk calls, I would be tempted. It's just that the only reason I wouldn't is because of this other project, basically a covers project that I'm doing, which is basically a more meta version of that funny thing where it was like comps and we're playing the Michelle Branch. You know, it's like that, but it's meta. And I'm really enjoying it. And I really do like playing other people. I mean, you would know, you know, being in a cover band, it's like, that was why I started playing music. Before I even had written a song, me and Kobe were playing, you know, Through Being Cool from front to back. in his parents' room and blowing out the. So I still love that, and adding my own thing to it, I think, is really fun. So I would say a 50-50 on Punk Goes Crunk, depending on who's involved. Yeah. I mean, if it was the same lineup, I'd have to pass. Gotcha. You know what I mean? Like, it was like me and Kenny Vasoli and all those dudes lining up to do like Migos songs. I'm not doing.
Not the Migos song cover.
No, I'm really glad that died before all that.
Yeah. It's a little less of the old.
Yeah, because like Drake emo. Imagine like Boys Like Girls covering Drake. That's intense. That's a lot. You'd have to be very emo in that moment to handle that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the same would be like, who would cover a Juice WRLD song? Like who would? I feel like you would have to be like really in your feels and just like be really. You need to know.
Someone's gonna cover fucking Lil Peep. Yeah. Like it's dark. You know what I mean? They're like, no, I can't. It's come too full circle. Yeah. Man. When it was like covering, Usher, that was like they're far enough apart that it's ironic. In this case, it's just like awkward. Read the room. You know what I mean?
You also, I want to shout out our friend Adam Siska, who I know used to play with you for a while.
Obsessed with him. He's one of my favorite people.
He is amazing.
Are you friends with Robbie Rob? With like Rob Wales? That guy? Are you from Chicago?
Yeah,
like
we're in Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. So we recently became friends with Robbie Rob, who I think was from that world too, and like a lot of my friends were in that Chicago world. But it's really another one of those scenes that was so cool to me living in LA, which there was no scene legitimately, that I want to live in Chicago and go see the Alkaline Trio and like all that stuff. You guys got to live that. Congratulations.
Yeah, we're at the place where we're like, I'm so tired of seeing Alkaline Trio. I've seen them so many times. I've heard these songs so many times. Yeah. To like have some people.
It's like it's like Rocky Horror Picture Show of emo in a way, right?
Well, them and like Rise Against, like again, like I love Rise Against, but I'm pretty sure in 1 year I saw Rise Against at least a minimum of 5 times.
Like one of my favorite bands, I think, was like that in like the early 2000s, Piebald. They're literally probably my favorite emo band, but they would just somehow be on every show. They'd be on every show to the point you're like, okay, well, I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to do with this energy because it makes me cry and it makes me happy, but like I don't have anything left to give you. And all those like Alkaline Trio guys are sober now and they're like singing, they're like jaked on beers. I'm like, oh. We're all sober. We're all watching it. Oh shit! I was someone else.
We filled an hour really fast. This was so fucking cool.
Yeah, this is so rad.
Sorry. This was amazing, and I had the best time. But I do feel self-conscious of how much I talk constantly.
Here's
I'm glad that it made it easy. Yeah, and you guys are really smart too. I think we're like the Three Musketeers.
There we go.
We all talk. It felt even, but even though I felt like it was like a perfectly matched bunch of intellects dancing amongst each other in podcasts, I still felt like a fucking dork, and I felt like I couldn't shut the fuck up.
I mean, you're the guest. You should be the one
you're
talking.
the guest. The big thing is...
I hate that. I hate that.
The big thing is you have a good interview is when like you hardly talk or you talk minimally.
I hope that's true. Okay.
It is. Trust me, I work in journalism and I teach journalism, and that's what I tell my students.
Right. Okay. No, you're right. Because as a listener, you know what I mean? Like you want to hear the person talk, probably more than Dax Shepard, but then like Dax is saying that
it's why I like the celebrity podcast, and we are not. We are just a couple of nerds from Chicago.
Yeah, we're a couple of bozos from Chicago.
Sorry, you couldn't get the celeb podcast. You got us two assholes.
We toured back together, and I'm the biggest fucking celeb.
Listen, we're only the third best podcast in Chicago, technically. So.
We are.
That's like my band in the scene.
See,
we'd probably be 7th, I think, maybe 8th. Sometimes we don't even make that top 10. like BuzzNet lists, the best pop songs of all time. I'm like, come on, man. Just give me one. It's like above us is, there's some questionable stuff.
Give me a treat. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sitting here with my kids and they're looking at me like I'm weird and I'm a waste. And I want to just go, look on your iPad. Number 8.
Let's go searching. You'll find me. It's going to be. Do your kids
go
like
tell
your
your
music?
friends.
They do. And I feel really fucking lucky that they do. They make fun of me all the time. My daughter, it looks like my phone's, I'm 4%. But I have to say that, like, my daughters will go up to me and literally go like, hey, tonight will be the night that I will fall for you.
Well, before your phone dies.
They're like, how are you doing? You feel like you're going to listen to your emo?
You're gonna listen to your
Yeah,
emo.
I am. You're going to listen to Melanie Martinez? Well, yeah, wow, Melanie, woo, woo, woo. Oh, I'm so, like, we make fun of each other about, she's right there. She's, it's like, kind of judgmentally, but also amused, which is basically what I get.
Well, before your phone dies, if you want to toss out like any, well, I mean, if you have any shows you can announce, obviously when we were young, when the record comes out, and anything you want to like let people know that's coming out soon.
I would say, like, if you just to stay tuned to all those streaming services, because I think we're going to kind of release things piecemeal instead of doing the kind of like old school model of like you release an album and then like wait 2 years. You know what I mean? We wanted, like, now that we're kind of back, I want to be releasing stuff as much as possible and engaging in that way, because I'm not good yet with social media. I don't let myself do social media. I had a bad experience. I left. Like, we'll see. But I do know that I want to put more songs out than we usually do. So just kind of like, there are some bands where they just don't release music for a long time, and you kind of are like, all right, like, see ya, Cursive. But then they come back and they start releasing a lot, and you're like, oh, I can look at the Death Cab, like, iTunes, and there's like, oh, they did an acoustic record. Like, so I think, we're at that point where you're going to see more things in general. And I would say, to anyone who actually knows who I am or listens to any of these records, to like, it's a sad, plea, but to like check out my comic stuff, because it's a whole other end of me. And if you do like, let's say, Is a Real Boy, and that kind of stuff that I did, like, the comics are exactly like that. It's not like you're going to pick up my comic and it's suddenly like, Game of Thrones, like really serious. It's very weird and meta, and I'm inserted into a lot of it. So yeah, Marvel Moon Knight, start there maybe. Marvel's Moon Knight. I worked on that.
Yeah, I'll say check that out because I'm a Marvel fan, so check that out.
Yeah, I mean, that Oscar Isaac killed it, man. He's not a Jew though. It's a little. They should have come to the court. No, he's hot.
Yeah,
Correct.
Him and Pedro Pascal are just running it right now.
I mean, this beard compared to that beard, I don't feel good about myself when I look. Jew or no Jew.
Well, Max, this is just incredible.
This has been fantastic, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you. That makes me feel great. I'm going to go back to what I usually do, which is like basically just sit and like plug different things in, USB-C cables. I'm like, shit, that one not working, and I have to look for the other. And that's really most of my time. I don't like do anything exciting or go out to bars and see other people like this. No, with the cables. Yeah. So I'm going to feel really good. Like when I can't reach one and I'm like, fuck, and I'm like pushing too hard. I'm holding my breath while my hand's under the table. I'm like, ah. I'm going to think about your guys' faces and how you actually were touched in some way by this, because that's real. It's like, I feel I have imposter syndrome. I can't really, I'm going to try to soak it in, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
a lot. Like, I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.